Kia ora te marino. Kia whakapapa paunamu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou, ia tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, jade. Pathway for us all this day. Give love, receive love, and to let us show respect for each other. Huie tai. Kia ora tātou katoa. Thank you all.
Right on. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Erich von Daniken. I am the author of Chariots of the Gods and many other titles. I should be now in the United States, in Sedona. I should have speeches and discussions, and I love the United States. But because of this corona situation, COVID-19, nobody can travel, nobody can fly, nobody can enter the United States, not even Switzerland. So we had to change all this. We had to change the date. And in November, this Earth Origins will be held there, a big conference. And of course, in November, I will be there in person. But right now, I have given my first speech here on video, so that at least you can hear and see me for roughly 1.5 hours. But the whole Erich von Daniken in nature, you will see in November in Sedona.
You know, you run the gamut. On the one hand, you've got all the woo stuff from the uber new age group, which I still actually, you know, accept a lot of the new age insights. There's great stuff there. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? In some respects, I probably am more of a pagan than anything. You know, I'm kind of a nature worshiper. But you've got, on the one hand, you've got stuff that you could never actually demonstrate scientifically, and then on the other end, you've got this reductionist model of I think of it as the Darwinian. It's all just a cosmic accident, really has no meaning, right? So somewhere in there is this third way of looking at the earth. And I think we can be rational, we can use our reason, we can be evidentiary based, you know, we can use the scientific method, but at the same time, we can't forget about our intuition and our instincts and our willingness to look back, you know, and not this kind of modern day chauvinism where we assume that people from thousands of years ago had no scientific comprehension of the universe. See, I disagree with that. I think that maybe they framed it using different typology, different method, different symbology, and so on. But it was nonetheless, in their own way, a scientific model of the universe. And that they would have had technologies, and technologies may have not looked anything like, you know, our fossil fuel-based technology of today. Because there are enough tantalizing evidence out there to suggest the possibility of alternative technologies that wouldn't necessarily leave, you know, a massive infrastructure residuum for, you know, for us thousands of years later to come and document. To find an equivalent level of species loss in the zoological record, we basically have to go back to an episode called the Hemphillian extinction event, and it dates to about 5 million years ago. So if we use the species loss as a yardstick of severity, we can see that these events of the end of the Ice Age, the Pleistocene Holocene transition, where the Younger Dryas is right there in the middle of that transition, it was probably the most severe event to affect this planet in 5 million years. And our ancestors lived through it. Obviously they did, because if they didn't, we wouldn't be having this Zoom conference here this evening. Clearly, but we are. So somebody survived. The woolly mammoths didn't. The giant cave bear, Ursus spalius, didn't survive. The giant short-faced bear didn't survive. The camelops, the saber-toothed cats, all of these, the list goes on. The giant armadillos, and the giant ground sloths that were the size of modern-day elephants. The Mammothus imperator stood 16 feet at the shoulder. That's basically twice the height of a modern elephant, right? These guys were huge. They're gone. How do we explain that mass extinction? So this is one of the events that requires more investigation. Here, what I've done, I've gone back. I did this graph really 15, 20 years ago, so it requires some tweaking. But basically, I went back 144,000 years BP, which is before present, and although that was about when I did this graph, the oldest known human skeletons were modern human skeletons were dating about 150,000 years. They're now getting pushed back to at least another 30,000, 40,000 years. So we're looking at earliest modern humans at probably 180,000 years. And that's just what we know, So in other words, skeletal remains of modern humans that are dated 180,000 years tells us that 180,000 years ago, a modern human was walking around somewhere, right? It doesn't tell us how long before that the very first modern human showed up. We just know that 180,000 years ago, there were modern people. So what I did was I began looking, as I'm going through and studying these events, what I think of as the outsized events, the non-linear events, the discontinuities within the continuum of global change, the punctuation marks, if you will. What I began looking at the severity of these events, and I began to think in terms of, if an event of such equivalent magnitude were to happen today, what effect would it have on modern civilization? So my criteria was, I was looking for events that seemed to indicate that they were of sufficient magnitude that if they didn't eliminate modern civilization, they would at least put it under extraordinary stress.
And my idea is to bring the past into the present and see how we can learn from the people that gave us this incredible civilization that we're surrounded with, and see how we can learn from them as a key point to where we're going to go into our future, because there's so much of what was built in the ancient days, built with huge rocks, which are really very impractical. And the one thing that I keep seeing again and again and again is that they've used very large rocks to build incredible monuments, because they had the ability to foresee that we would get lost in the forthcoming 10,000 years or so since these monuments were built. And they built these things to last until our time. It's almost like they're telling us something about what happened to them so that we don't make the same mistake. Because as any ancient culture will tell you, things have a habit of going around in circles. In the West, we tend to think of things linearly. We have a big bang, we go from molecules to hunter-gatherers, and the incredible social civilization we have today with cell phones. To any ancient culture, this is ridiculous. We go in the round. We go through moments of civilization, degradation, downfall, and we rebuild again. But every time we do so, we expand like an ever-expanding outward spiral, and we get better at doing what we do.
I'm going to focus on serpents or serpent symbolism, the way it's marked in the landscape, how this connects with earth energies and the enchantment of the landscape. So these are some of the things we're going to go through. I'll just introduce myself in one moment, but this first I wanted to show you, because we're going to look at a few very ancient sites that have evidence of this kind of serpent motif. And there's very high significance in this, because this goes way back to the time of the Watchers and the Anunnaki, written about in the very earliest texts, and how they're sort of spread through the world, through different cultures, and how it may, or I believe it definitely is, connected with earth energies, and how to harness them for various consciousness and fertility purposes. So there's some of the books I've written or been involved in writing. Jim, I co-authored this Giants of Record with him a few years ago. So the TV show Search for the Lost Giants with him as well, Ancient Aliens, a whole bunch of those I've been on, and a few other, a book on earth grids and stone circles. Most recently, Megalith Studies in Stone came out last year or so, and this is the new one that's coming out later this year that me and Jim are working on, which we're going to touch on parts here because there's a lot to do with geomancy and how the ancient giants worked with the landscape. It's actually them who actually kind of manifested all this.
So for me, what was so relevant about what Carl Kalman has had to say in his work about the ninth wave of consciousness is the way the Mayans stated is it's this never-ending sine wave, serpent-like sine wave that's called the plumed serpent in the language of the Mayan of the time, the expression of the Maya. The plumed serpent, which is undulating through time all the time, and it's bringing with it high consciousness and low consciousness. We know the same thing in the Vedas, high periods of consciousness that descend into lower, where there's an active creative phase, and then there's a phase in which we all tend to rest or even sleep, or even in some cases, a type of destruction can occur to wipe away the old to make way for the new creative impulse that's coming in. And Carl Kalman and I talked about various periods of history in which the wave was reaching its zenith, in which it would then fall back down again. And of course, because Sumerian history was so long, it had a few of those different waves running through it. So if we're looking at, if we start just going back, I'm going to put this in a framework of, we have this period of time, the last 5,000 years, which is really where Carl kind of focused our conversation in one of his recent papers, which inspired me to call him up and do an interview with him. I was so struck by it, and you're going to find why in a little bit. I'll explain the purpose for it. But just as the background, he talked about the rise and fall of these various civilizations based on this plumed serpent, this sine wave of day, which is at the top of the cycle, and night, which is the bottom. Now we can look at that on even the level high. We can look at that on the level of the human nervous system, right? The autonomic nervous system, where we have rest and then we have activity, right? So sympathetic and parasympathetic. We have this down to a cellular level of anabolism and catabolism, the birth and destruction of the cells in our body. Every single thing works on the principle of creation and destruction at some point, or creation and then death, birth and death. And that's what the day and night cycles are in the Mayan cosmology.
I'm not comfortable in calling all power places sacred sites because the reason is there are a lot of power places that were never discovered and utilized as religious sites. So they weren't sacred sites, they're just power places. So there is definitely a difference between the two. And the difference between the two is there are, in my website and my books, I write about 32 different types of these power places, 32 different types. And I give examples of each one of them. Sacred sites are power places that became discovered and utilized by people for religious reasons. Not all power places did. That's the key difference, is power places are places for a variety of functions. And in my writings, I talk about there's 20 different factors that contribute to the power place. There's 32 different types of sacred sites, but there's 20 different factors that contribute to the power place, one of which is religious usage. And so I think there's these 32 different types, and there's 20 different reasons for the occurrence of a power at these places. An energy, a quality, is something, a vibration that you want to call that. So there's this distinct difference between power places and sacred sites. And a lot of times I hear people talk about one when actually that's not the correct way to talk about it. My website was called Places of Peace and Power at sacredsites.com. And sometimes I used to think that notion of sacred sites is too limiting because there's some power places that couldn't be considered sacred sites. But if people ask me later for more, definition between these two things, I can do that.
What I see all around the world is inexplicable stonework built absolutely at a later date, an earlier date, and by tools and technology that we just don't understand, more of a metaphysical sound, light, levitation technology. That's what I see. And I didn't come into any of this with that, belief system. I really didn't spend much time thinking of extraterrestrials, although my thought was the universe is so large, there has to be life out there. but I didn't know they were so interwoven in the creation of humans and our history and our future. And so I see ancient sites and everything from a new lens now. And I do stonework to pay all the bills. So I'm not into like being a cult leader or, or cooking up some theory in my basement or, or charging $183 for some fake disclosure or whatever. That's not my gig. And I don't want to diss anybody, but my point is that I really liberated myself from like, phony desire for accolades or anything like that. I've done a bunch of shows for History Channel and other places, but what I've come around to is just, I think it's really interesting. And I think a lot of people share this story and they want to trust, guys like, you have Hancock, Graham Hancock, Robert Bivall, Andrew Collins, Greg Little, Brian Forrester, Hugh Newman. There's a group of well-meaning, focused researchers who are doing a really good job, is my point. And people want to be able to trust that you're not like trying to be self-aggrandizing or create, not being objective about the research you're doing. So that's what I like to do, is just, I do a comparative analysis. I don't make anything up. I don't really even theorize. I just point to everything that's come together from all my, research.
Right, so let's start with symbols. And so you can see Manly P. Hall on the screen here. And this is a quote from his Melchizedek and the Mystery of Fire. And it says, when the human race learns to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men. They shall then know the truth and more than that. They shall realize that from the beginning, truth has been in the world unrecognized, save by a small but gradually increasing number appointed by the lords of the dawn as ministers to the needs of human creatures, struggling to gain the consciousness of their divinity. Okay, so from his quote, I would like to point out that the lords of dawn, these might be me and you. You're watching this topic for a reason, and I hope it speaks to you. And we need to bring a lot of light into our past and maybe bring information forward. We can learn from it. That's a really helpful thing for our future. I know I want the future to be better. I have a daughter. I want, everything to be better. I want her to learn. I'm sure you do as well. So as far as we can tell, symbols existed long before the written word. And we've all heard the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And this is true. Symbols are very tricky. And for instance, you may not have realized that right now you are looking at ancient vulva symbols with a modern spin. You can also call these yanis. Images both modern and ancient can invoke different responses and meanings for different people, because we base our explanatory ideas of what we perceive something may be from what we have experienced in the world.
Nonverbal communication is 90 to 98% of the communication that humans have. And so it's learning now how to tap into the true self, integrate that, not looking for the answers outside. Society has taught us that if we get a good job or go to school and get a good education, we can get a lot of money and buy a big house and we'll have happiness. But all of those things are external. And when we become intuitive, intrinsically motivated, when we begin to use the energies that we already have, we're taking steps in the unfolding. The whole idea of Earth and the people on the Earth, although often it feels like some great experiment, some huge psyops, watching what we're going to do and how we're going to respond. But I think the whole idea is to be born without memory and to be able to evolve and unfold into back to your truth. But there's a big misdirection in society that prevents us from speaking the truth. In fact, speak out of line and the public will police you into what is appropriate or not appropriate. And it's out of fear. So people have been afraid that there are ways as a light embodied being that we can know what we are and why we're here, be able to differentiate between our fate and our destiny, to be able to make those moves rapidly in our unfolding, because we are in the higher third dimension. The universe as we know it is literally expanding in this second. It's not new. And I could see that I was disembodied. And it came to me that to the definition of human was Hugh is the type of measurement that we use to measure the depth or the saturation of light. Man comes from the word manifestation, to come into the physical or to be embodied, in that a human is a light embodied being, and race and gender are subcategories of that particular definition of the entity that we are. And I realized that when we know what we are, we're more capable of understanding all of the large philosophical questions that man has pondered for millenniums. Why are we here? What is it all about? But when we've limited ourselves to being confined or thinking in the three-dimensional world, simply interpreting everything by our senses, what we can feel, see, or touch, we're missing the deeper internal part of ourselves. And so understanding that we are human creates this limitlessness in what we're all about. And it automatically sort of knocks on the door of the true self or the spiritual self, but certainly the multidimensional self.
According to the Vedic cosmology, time is cyclical. And the basic unit of this cyclical time is called the kalpa, or the day of Brahma. It lasts about 4,320,000,000 years. And it's followed by a night of Brahma that lasts the same period of time, 4,320,000,000 years. And the nights follow the days repeatedly, again and again and again. And during the days of Brahma, life, including human life, is manifest in the universe. And at night, and during the night of Brahma, it's dormant, like in a sleeping state. And according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we're now about halfway through the current kalpa, or day of Brahma. The kalpa is 4,320,000,000 years, so we're about 2 billion years into the current kalpa, or creation cycle. That means that as a Vedic archaeologist would expect to find evidence for a human presence going back about 2 billion years in this kalpa, in this universe. But before that, there was another day of Brahma, another day of Brahma, another day of Brahma, going back trillions and trillions of years. And we find that mentioned in the Buddhist text as well. Another complicating feature is that according to the Vedic cosmology, there's not just one universe, there are numberless universes coexisting and also going through the cycles of creation and destruction that go back endlessly in time and will continue forward in time endlessly.
I found it really intriguing that if you go from Spider Rock due south, to go 4,358 miles on this longitude line, you hit Easter Island exactly. It's on this exact longitude line. So it might be considered an axis of the world. So if you go south to Easter Island, you can also go north this way. Here's a sipapuni, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but you can go north over the North Pole and you go exactly to Mohenjo-Daro, which was the metropolis, a major city laid out in the grid on the Indus River. And, you know, it was going strong between 2500 and 1900 BC. It had running water, a sewer system, fired bricks, public baths. It was a major place. But what's intriguing about this is the scripts from the Indus River and the Easter Island script called Rongo Rongo. They're very similar. You can see here the comparison between the Indus River script and this Rongo Rongo, or the Easter Island script, and they're quite similar. So there has to have been some kind of interaction in very early time.
Like we're saying, we are moving into non-linear time, also known as full presence now. That is why I started to get you all in your bodies and starting to move outside of understanding things as concept and understanding things as experience and embodiment. That is the new era that we are going into, right? And so as we go into this presence, we start to move into this present. It's a gift, right? It's really a gift for ourselves and each other that we're being invited to move more into presence throughout the day. There's different ways of doing that, making sure you have a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, you know, all of that's going to help.
Answering Pedro's words previously about unity, kotahitanga. Each one of us here is what we call a rangatira. And the rangatira, no matter how big the group, what we call rāranga, weave all the energies together so that the energies become one energy. Then everything can move smoothly, rather than so many different energies all over the place. So we're all rangatira here, doing rāranga weaving. Just briefly, in my ancient culture, we have three hearts. And I was, from a child, I was taught to breathe from my toes to my head, not outwards. And because we have our pūmanawa, which is our spiritual heart. We don't have third eye in my culture, but that's where it's based. Our spiritual heart, pūmanawa. The manawa is our physical heart, and the belly button, that's our whatu manawa. That's our emotional heart, and that holds the cord that attaches it to Papatuanuku, our earth mother. By breathing toes to head, we're in touch with our three hearts all the time. And because I've worked physically hard all my life, for instance, I was taught to slow my breath down, right down, and working hard or heavy lifting, slowing the heartbeat down gave me more physical strength, and then was able to work even harder. So that's our, again, our ancient ways with our three manawa. The first chant is for, it's connected to our whatu manawa, our belly button, our emotional heart, because it's to send healing to Papatuanuku, our earth mother. But also we've got to look up and send healing to Rangi Nui, our sky father. It's also for binding cultures together as one. Again, as Pedro said, unity, kotahitanga. And just binding ancestral roots back together again, ancestral pain. And the second chant is for spiritual and emotional healing, and to heal sickness as well. With this virus, as I've said, I see nothing but positive out of it. I refuse to look at the negative. I look at balance. This virus feeds on fear. That's what feeds it. And so my balance is fearless. I'm not frightened of it. And no matter what people think, we fight every day. And what I mean by that is if this virus entered my body, the first thing my immunity system would do would be to fight it. And now if we have the rainbow tribe, the rainbow people, we have the rainbow warriors. And the rainbow warriors, I hate the word, but the greatest weapon we can have as rainbow warriors, I hate the word weapon, I mean. The greatest weapon we can have as rainbow warriors, the spear of love. Because that spear never misses. Before I start, I must say to everybody, it's been such an honor to be in such esteemed company as well. And new friendships, which I know will be very special as they are now.